The earthquakes are not stopping in Israel. Following months of threats and escalation and pressure for him to resign, the Israeli IDF chief of staff finally submitted to the pressure and handed his resignation. In his letter of resignation, he said, on October the 7th, the IDF under my command failed in its mission to protect the citizens of Israel. My responsibility for the terrible failure accompanies me day by day, hour by hour, and will remain so for the rest of my life. And it wasn't just him who resigned. Southern Command Commander Major General Yaron Finkelman also announced the end of his role, saying, "The failure on October the 7th is burned into me for the rest of my life." So two of the most important figures when it comes to the Israeli army handed in their resignation. It wasn't only them who resigned from the army during the past 15 months. We've had one of the main commanders in the Gaza division resigning. Similarly, with the West Bank division of Gaza, Haliva, the main person in the military intelligence directorate in Israel too, alongside the whole team of the IDF spokesperson resigning during the war. Now we also have, of course, the resignation of Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of Interior Security inside of Israel. Why are they resigning, and what do the resignations mean? Well, they're resigning because of internal battles more than anything. Israel has been torn apart for the past 2 years. Firstly, there was the judicial reform that Benjamin Netanyahu and his crew wanted to lead in Israel. They had a very intense opposition internally from major parts in the population. And it wasn't just the population, it was the political and military echelons as well in Israel. So there were calls to refuse to serve in the army from that time, that we're moving towards dictatorship. That all increased after the 7th of October. Then there's the actual failure. They themselves are saying we failed. Someone resigning is a confirmation of failure. The biggest evidence of this massive failure are these resignations, are the disastrous images coming from Israel, are the celebrations coming from Gaza. And it appears to be that for the first time in Israel's history, by the way, there is a consensus inside of Israel that they have been defeated and that Hamas won. Let me give you an example when it comes to the Israeli media. There was an article in one of the main Israeli newspapers saying this: Islam and Middle East scholar, Israeli of course, Hamas plan succeeded. This is why they won. That's normal talk inside of Israel. Most of the Israeli media is full of talks of how Hamas won and how Israel lost. In 2006, although there was a state investigation after the war with Lebanon that confirmed that there were failures from Israel, Israeli media wasn't outright calling everything a failure. But now, despite 15 months of genocide, they are calling it a failure. And there is a consensus amongst the Israeli population when it comes to this failure. So now you have the resignations, internal pressure, internal splits. And they're trying to run away from this failure by doing what? By having an escalation in the West Bank. Now, the very dangerous thing about the resignation of the IDF chief of staff and senior figures who were present in the past 15 months in the Israeli genocide army is that Benjamin Netanyahu will try to bring someone who is more aligned with him. Herzi Halevi had lots of problems with Benjamin Netanyahu. He was criticizing him. Netanyahu did not trust him. He used to security check him before he had meetings with him. And he didn't really want him there. Herzi Halevi challenged Benjamin Netanyahu, especially when it comes to the operation in Rafah. Many claim that the delay in the operation of Rafah was due to Herzi Halevi, who said at the time, we need to have political moves moving forward rather than military moves, and we are not really that fit when it comes to the military to have this massive operation inside of Rafah. They needed 10,000 soldiers urgently at the time. So who is the person who is likely to replace Herzl? It's a man called Eyal Zamir. Eyal Zamir, he is the Defense Ministry Director General. And he also had very senior figures in the Israeli army, was the Deputy Chief of Staff too. What's different about Eyal Zamir is the fact that he is more accepted by Netanyahu, and he's more accepted by the right wing, to a level where key right-wing figures inside of Israel, the far right in Israel, are saying now this is Zamir's time. This means that you could, for the first time, have a blatantly right-wing or a candidate of the right-wing in the position of the Israeli chief of staff. Will that make any difference when it comes to the killing? With everyone killed in Israel, left, right, it doesn't matter who. People who started to describe themselves as peacemakers were mass murders inside of Israel. That's not really going to change the ethos, because Israel was based on ethnic cleansing and mass killing. But what that will change is things inside of Israel. The people who have already lost faith in the political leadership and the military leadership, seeing a figure that aligned with Benjamin Netanyahu and the right wing going to the army, that will be the final nail in the coffin of the Israeli army's image when it comes to the population. For a very long time, the Israeli army was seen as an independent body, similarly to the Supreme Court in Israel, for example, that Benjamin Netanyahu again wants to destroy. But now if he does that, and of course that image has been tarnished for the past 15 months, by the way, because they have been implementing Benjamin Netanyahu's plans and orders, despite them challenging him. But now this will be the final nail in their coffin when it comes to any sort of trust from the majority of the Israeli public. This is something very serious internally inside of Israel. The Israeli army was considered to be something holy. It was a taboo to criticize them or to speak about refusing to serve, for example, or refusing drafts or conscription. Now it's all becoming more normal, despite all of the propaganda and despite all of the moves that the government is taking inside of Israel. The next thing that I wanted to talk to you about is what this is leading to. Well, this is leading to a campaign now in the West Bank. Israel launched a campaign called the Iron Wall. It's as if they're obsessed with iron for some reason. Ironclad, iron swords, iron wall, iron dome. And the only thing made out of iron is, the beatings that they're getting from the Palestinian resistance. That's what's made out of iron. Well, what they're making is more like foam rather than, iron. So they're calling it the Iron Wall this time. Why are they having this Iron Wall? They're having this Iron Wall because they're trying to run away from the failure in Gaza. So by having all of the eyes focused on Gaza, you will constantly have a scrutiny internally. Everyone in Israel, like we mentioned, are talking about the massive failure when it comes to Hamas and the fact that Hamas won and Israel lost. And imagine that Hamas won after 15 months of genocide and destruction against the people, confirmed inside of Israel without any investigation, by the way. And with the chief of staff resigning and the southern command commander resigning too, both of them describing it as a massive failure that will haunt them for life, this whole war and this whole campaign. So they want to shift things to the West Bank. How likely are they to do anything in the West Bank? They're not likely to do anything in the West Bank for multiple reasons. The first reason is Israel has already been present in the West Bank since 1967, and it's only been expanding its reach in the West Bank with an obedient authority in the form of the Palestinian Authority led by Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank. They had their forces in Jenin fighting the Palestinian resistance for over 40 days. And now the spokesman of the forces of the armed forces of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, he said, we want to withdraw now from Jenin because we don't want to risk clashing with Israel. So they have an obedient authority in the West Bank, and they are technically present almost everywhere they want in the West Bank. So despite all of that, the Palestinian resistance in the West Bank, the armed resistance in the West Bank, managed to increase its power in the past decade. The levels that they attacked Israel in the past 15 months, side by side with Gaza, are significant. The weapons, the side bombs, the sophistication, the monitoring, the recording, the publishing, the media, everything was remarkable, the way they managed to do that despite them being technically really choked by Israel. That means they have a direct channel of supply. They have a supporting surrounding, and they clearly have people operating with them in key figures in the West Bank. That's something very important. And that's, again, another indication of the massive failure coming from Israel. What does that say? Well, that says if Israel managed to allow that to happen, or failed to counter it, failed to take this threat down, this increased threat in the West Bank from the Palestinian resistance, what are they going to do with this campaign? Nothing. Why? Because they haven't been able to do anything against these people throughout this whole time, for the past several decades in the West Bank, despite all of these security operations. So the resistance will continue. And the resistance exists purely because of Israel itself. The resistance is a symptom to a virus. The virus is Israel and Zionism. It's the disease that needs to be eliminated. So that the resistance, you won't have a resistance for what exactly? If we have equal rights tomorrow between the Jordan River to the sea, a resistance for what? Right? But then again, Israel is always like that, a failed neo-colonialist project planted there to spread havoc, war, and terror in the region. Cash cow for the military-industrial complex, using people as cannon fodder through fairy tales, and not looking at anything realistic to try and solve the solution that's been going on for so long. With so many contradictions, by the way, and so many false claims and talk like we were supposed to be the safe haven, for example, they'll tell you of Jewish people, when Israel has been the worst thing that ever happened for Jewish people, with Jews being killed the most inside of Israel because of their state, speaking on behalf of Judaism, in the name of Judaism, committing genocide and barbarism against everyone in the name of their religion, and again acting like they can do whatever they want and get away with it. So all of this in the West Bank is not going to work. It isn't going to work because the reasons would remain there. This is an attempt coming from Israel, and there were also reports coming from Israeli media that part of it was due to Benjamin Netanyahu promising certain things to Bezalel Smotrich as a favor for accepting the first phase of the ceasefire in Gaza. Although Smotrich is, by the way, saying that Netanyahu promised him that he will continue the war in phase 2. But again, there is no confirmation about that whatsoever. This campaign in the West Bank is being conducted by the IDF, by the Israeli Shabak, and by the border force as well. So it's a combination of all of these security factions inside of Israel. However, again, the fighters in the West Bank, well, they're roaming in the streets, and despite all of the Israeli pressure for the past several decades to take them down, they've always risen. They've always gone back up because there's always a reason. Israel always gives them a reason. They have people stealing their lands. They have people terrorizing them 24/7. They have checkpoints every 15 minutes. They're living in an open-air prison similar to Gaza, really. with just more space to move when it comes to Gaza, in comparison to Gaza. So this is the primary reason of this escalation, and I do not believe that Israel will be achieving any results. And this reminded me of the escalation against Lebanon by Benjamin Netanyahu when the protests were ramping up against him to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. All of the eyes were on Benjamin Netanyahu, and they could see the failure in Gaza already. So then he waged an all-out war against Lebanon. This is something similar. At the end of the day, they're going to have to de-escalate. And of course, so long as Israel exists, there will always be problems. But even with the West Bank, they will not be able to have any of their objectives achieved. Moving on to the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Musa Abu Marzouk, who is a senior figure in the Hamas movement, he made some interesting statements. He made some interesting statements in relation to the United States and the Biden administration. He said that they're expressing readiness for a dialogue with the United States, signaling a potential shift, the article stated, in international engagement following the Gaza ceasefire. The most relevant things that he mentioned in his interview with the New York Times, actually, is apart from the fact that they're prepared for a dialogue with America and achieving understandings on everything, that they're also inviting them to go. He can come and see, he's saying, right? The Trump administration and their representatives, they can come and see and talk to the people and try and understand their feelings and wishes. So the American position can be based on the interests of all the parties and not only one party, according to Abu Marzouk. And there was also one very significant statement coming from him, is the fact that he said, Musa Abu Marzouk, if it wasn't for President Trump, his insistence on ending the war, and his dispatching of a decisive representative, the deal wouldn't have happened. And he was referring to Witkoff, the envoy of Donald Trump in the Middle East, Stephen Witkoff, who also was reported to consider what? And that's again based on a report coming from the NBC, actually. He's considering to visit Gaza to help sustain the ceasefire, according to a member of Trump's transition team familiar with the truce process. If Donald Trump's envoy visits Gaza, that's going to be something very significant. I don't recall seeing any representative at a very senior level from the United States in Gaza. The majority of the time, of course, in the West Bank with the Palestinian Authority, but Gaza, that's something that we haven't seen, in particular after Hamas was democratically elected in Gaza. The only senior figure was the previous president, Jimmy Carter, who was monitoring the elections in 2006 and saying how democratic they were, the most democratic elections in the Arab world. And his organization was monitoring those elections, but not acting members of the administration. This is going to be something significant if it does happen. And it is required. I mean, the shift when it comes to the United States administration is very much required at one point. And there could be perhaps a shift sometime down the line, especially with these reports, with the fact that Trump pushed for this ceasefire. Again, regardless of any statements, I mean, the main thing is the actions that are being implemented. At the end of the day, we do have a ceasefire. Yes, you could see certain breaches here and there, like there was this breach yesterday. Today, less reports of any breaches, really. There were no reported breaches today inside of Gaza. But there's an escalation in the West Bank. But there is definitely potential. And the final thing that I wanted to talk to you about is a statement coming from one of the Hamas figures abroad, Bassem Naim. Bassem Naim is a man who has been talking a lot in the past 15 months to international media. And he's now saying that the negotiations during the coming stages will continue on the resistance terms. We're due to start negotiations or hearing about these negotiations in just over 10 days. On day 16, negotiations are due to take place on phases 2 and 3 of the war. Israel is trying to ignore these negotiations, but they're secretly dipping in information to the Israeli public, like, we're going to withdraw from Netzarim eventually, we're going to withdraw from the buffer zone, we're going to be withdrawing from the Philadelphia corridor. All of that is coming with talks about the escalation in the West Bank, so that people can focus on the West Bank and focus less so on the negotiations where Israel is going to have to pay much heavier prices too when it comes to Gaza, and the fact that they will be withdrawing from all of these bases that primarily the Netzarim line, but also the Philadelphia corridor. And the Palestinians were seen now, of course, moving and checking all of the destroyed vehicles inside of Gaza. So Bassem Naim is saying that it's our conditions. It's not going to be Israel's conditions, not going to be anyone's conditions. It's going to be our conditions implemented in the next rounds in Gaza. He said that the pressure within the Zionist community on Netanyahu because of his failure was one of the factors that led him to submit to the resistance conditions in the agreement. And that this is a humanitarian phase. However, the next phases are going to have more results coming from them. Now, when it comes to results, today there was a record number of aid trucks going into Gaza, with the United Nations reporting 897 aid trucks going into Gaza. This is the biggest number of aid trucks I have ever heard of going into Gaza in one day, in a matter of 24 hours. Hamas, during the negotiations, said, we want 600 aid trucks a day. We need 600 aid trucks a day at least. And now this is a very significant number, because before the 7th of October, around 500 aid trucks a day used to get into Gaza. So this number is very significant. Naim also said that the people from the south who will be returning to the north, because there are scenes of people going back to the north now, these are people who were displaced internally in the northern part of Gaza, to the north of Gaza City and the Netzarim line that Israel built inside of Gaza. He said this is going to happen after the first week. People returning, if they're going to walk to the north, they're going to all be able to do that after the first week. There will be 1,000 Palestinian prisoners from Gaza who will be released in the second phase. Some of them will be going to foreign countries after receiving their confirmation, in fact, okaying it with them, their approval, and also that we will be seeking to completely empty the Israeli prisons from Palestinian prisoners. So clearly, Hamas are not only confident when it comes to the negotiations, they have big ambitions when it comes to the prisoners too. And what people need to remember is we're only in the humanitarian phase now. The top figures in the army, the commanders that Hamas kidnapped on the 7th of October, they're going to be left for the final phase. And when we reach that final phase, Israel won't have many options to try and tell the Palestinian resistance, oh no, we're not going to release X and Y. Because from their perspective, they're going to have to finalize everything to do with the prisoners of war, and they're going to have to pay any price that the Palestinian resistance asks them to pay.